Formula One had a stinker at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix in a race that was far from exciting, with very little on-track action or overtaking to talk of, as Red Bull made it 4 wins out of 4 in 2023 and secured their third 1-2 finish of the season. The race has not gone down well with the fans given the lack of racing that we saw during the Grand Prix, and has caused a bit of a debate as to whether F1's current rules package is working as it intended, or do we need further changes to spice up the action. It is clear that the drivers did struggle to execute any overtaking, even in the DRS zones and on a circuit that has the longest straight on the calendar. So this is now a question as to whether this is just a Baku specific problem, or does F1 seriously need to look into making further changes to improve the racing. Well, looking at the Grand Prix itself, it was yet another demonstration of Red Bull's dominance in 2023, as they comfortably won the sprint and the main race, finishing just under 20 seconds ahead of their nearest rival, who was Ferrari's Charles Leclerc. Behind Red Bull was another demonstration as to the clear disparity between the teams on the grid. You saw once again it was another close run thing between Ferrari, Mercedes and Aston Martin. Once again, very little to choose between those teams. But beyond them, there was another 20 to 25 second gap to the rest of the field. They were running their own race, they simply could not compete. And it was this gaggle of cars that was led by Esteban Ocon for most of the race that we saw what was ultimately the main problem in the race, which was the lack of overtaking. And despite the fact that all the drivers behind him were within the 1 second window to activate DRS, they couldn't exploit it to get past him. The FIA actually shortened the DRS zone on the main straight by 100 metres compared to last year, and this was for many a major contributor as to why we saw very little overtaking. Toto Wolff was pretty honest and blunt in his verdict on how the race came across from his point of view. He called it boring, not a thriller and not great entertainment, and he even called on Formula One to seek answers as to why there was so little on-track action. Something that has been called into question of late is the impact of the new regulations which were introduced at the start of last year, and F1 brought in these new rules that were designed to create better racing and allow drivers to overtake and follow one another much easier. There is a feeling that the new regulations have not delivered on what they initially promised, and Sergio Perez actually admitted after the race that the 2023 cars are more harder to follow in dirty air, as he thinks they have retained more downforce. But despite what Perez says, I think saying that the new regulations have failed is complete rubbish, because during the first 3 races in Bahrain, Saudi Arabia and Australia, we did see some decent amount of on-track action and overtaking. And at the end of the day, this is what the new rules intended to do in the first place. And I think they have been a success, because drivers can follow closer for longer without having to drop back at the risk of hurting their tyres or losing performance. Even if drivers can't execute and overtake, it is common that some circuits are more difficult to overtake than others. So it's unrealistic to expect these regulations to produce 50 plus overtakes every race. On top of that, people even suggesting that the new rules have not delivered based on the fact that Red Bull was both dominant last year and at the start of this year. But the purpose of these regulations was to improve the racing, not to close up the grid. That is the job of the cost cap and the sliding scale for aero testing, to bring the teams closer together. The cost cap was introduced to limit the amount of spending teams could do over the season, particularly the bigger teams. And the sliding scale is there to allow those low in the championship the ability to develop their car at a faster rate than their rivals in a bid to gain an edge in performance. I think that there are other ways that F1 can try and improve the racing, and one of those could be to implement its own version of IndyCar's push-to-pass system as opposed to DRS, because it works really well over in that series, as it includes that tactical element, but it also, you do see a variety of overtakes that make for pure organic racing. Another suggestion that I've seen floating around is introducing mandatory 2-stop races that would require drivers to use all 3 types of tyre compounds. But this is personally something that I would not back, even though the intention is clear to add an extra variable to the race, because you can't just start mandating the amount of pit stops that teams can do, and it is effectively manufacturing the racing. I think that we have just got to accept there are going to be boring races from time to time. It's like in football, you're going to get 0-0 draws, it's part of the game. So we don't need to start considering making rule changes just because a Grand Prix doesn't fulfil our expectations. And yes, Red Bull is dominating, but again, it is nothing new. Teams do go on periods of dominance. Look at Ferrari at the start of the 2000s, or more recently Mercedes. It doesn't mean that we can't still enjoy watching Formula One. So I want to hear your thoughts now. Let me know in the comments what you made of the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, and if you think that F1 should consider making rule changes, what changes should they make and why? Otherwise, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe on this video. Thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.